Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of At the Horn. I am your host, Aidan Mannix, and I am joined by my co-host, Max Ross.
Howdy, folks.
All right, let's jump straight into it. In today's episode, we are going to be going over every team this offseason, and we're going to be discussing and kind of grading their biggest moves of the offseason and just having an overall discussion on whether we think the moves they made were the right moves for where they're trying to go. So I'll start first with the Cleveland Cavaliers. Their main moves this offseason, they traded Isaac Okoro to the Bulls for Lonzo Ball. They re-signed Sam Merrill to a 4-year, $38 million deal. And they had small signings of Larry Nance and Thomas Bryant. So I think overall they did a decent job because they lost Ty Jerome in the offseason. The Grizzlies ended up signing him. He had a disappointing playoffs, so I don't hate the fact that they let him go. They substituted him with Lonzo Ball, who he definitely has injury concerns, but as an actual player outside of those concerns, I do like him. But I think their biggest weakness right now is that backup point guard if Lonzo has his injury problems. So I don't know
Yeah,
if you that.
yeah, I would say with Lonzo Ball at least, one of the major problems with the Cavs last season was like a lack of size in the backcourt. It's been a problem ever since they've paired Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland together. And Lonzo Ball immediately brings in a 6'6" frame at point guard. And if he even remotely shadows what he was pre-knee injury as a defender, that's a huge add for the Cavaliers team. And further, Sam Merrill, end of the year playoffs, he's a flamethrower with the behind the arc. And so I think that's great shooting that they can have back there with Max Strus. And Thomas Bryant's not a small signing either. He with the Pacers last year gave us some problems in New York. So I would overall grade the Cleveland Cavaliers a B plus offseason. I think they made the moves that they needed to make, and excited to see how they look this year.
I'm good with B plus two. I think that they have a lot of wings already, so trading Okoro won't hurt too much. They needed that guard depth, and they got it with Lonzo Ball.
Absolutely. Now moving on to the Thunder. No major moves on their end. A disappointing start to the season though, with their first round pick going down with an ACL injury during practice. I know they're excited to see the big man from Georgetown play. So that's a big loss for them, but they don't lack depth on that roster, and they're certainly a team to beat this year. I think out of the West, there's a few contenders. It's going to be probably the most contentious West that we've had in a while. So really excited. But just due to there not being many moves made, they secured their future in Chet with a 5-year, $250 million deal. A lot of money for him, but with the way players are getting paid nowadays, that's kind of chump change. So, I think they're excited about their team. They're young, they're hungry. Let's see if they can go back to back.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, like they have so much depth already. I don't think anyone expected them to make any sort of move or major move this offseason. They signed a bunch of their guys to extensions, and I think that's the best they can do. So I'd give them like an A. They didn't make any change to their roster like the Lakers did in when they won the chip in 2020, and then they traded for Dennis Schroeder and traded away a lot of their key pieces. They didn't do anything like that. They kept the team the same. I think that's the best they could do.
I'll give them a B. I think the draft. I didn't love their second round pick and Brooks Barnhizer. Maybe he'll prove me wrong, but I think there are some developmental plays they could have taken there instead. So I'll give them a B.
Okay. Moving on to the Celtics. Celtics made a lot of moves this offseason. They traded Drew Holiday for Anthony Simons. They traded Porzingis for George Niang and a second rounder. And then they traded Niang as a salary dump. They signed Chris Boucher and Luca Garza were their big signings. Subtractions, Drew Holiday and Porzingis, as I mentioned. They also lost Al Horford and Luke Cornett in free agency. Um, I mean, obviously the biggest thing for the Celtics is they had to figure out salary cap wise what to do because they were way over the second apron. And we knew going into the offseason that they were going to have to trade at least one or two of those big contracts. And I think that they made the right choices in trading Holiday and Porzingis over a guy like Derek White or even making a bigger move like Jalen Brown. So I think the Holiday move for Simons was great. I think a lot of people thought that the Celtics might have to attach draft capital on top of Holiday to get out of his contract. They instead get a quality player in Simons. He's not the most efficient player in the world, but the Celtics, it seems like this year they're going to be shooting a lot of threes like they did last year. I think Simons fits into that mold perfectly. I think it's a little disappointing that they got virtually nothing for Porzingis, but he had his weird health issues all season, that sickness that kind of hurt his play against the Knicks and even the Magic in the playoffs last year. I think overall, I'll say a B minus because losing Horford and Cornette also hurts quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, because of the Celtics and I'm biased, I'll give them like a C plus. You know, I think that there's definitely a gap right now in their front court. That losing Porzingis and Horford in the same offseason is going to hurt them, I think, ultimately. Chris Boucher, he's shown that he can score off the bench, but in terms of a big body who can match up with Towns, it's going to be a area of weakness for them for sure. I think Simons is an absolutely great pickup for them. Was a big fan of that move for them. They get a nice spark in him. In preseason, he looked good. His step back looked like a patented Dame Lillard step back. I think, to be able to keep that core between Tatum and Brown and even Derek White, it's an exciting team, and I think they might have a slow start to the year, but with how Tatum's looking, he's already dunking. He might even make the quickest comeback of all time in the NBA from an Achilles tear. So they're a team to watch at least. I can see them falling into the 5-6 seed. So excited to see what they do, and hopefully, as a Knick fan, I'd be nervous playing them in the first round of the playoffs if that comes down to it. So, but a C plus as an off season, I think.
Yeah, I mean, with the weak East, I could definitely see them sneaking into the playoffs, no question. And they're one of those teams that have the experience. So, like you said, I'd be scared to play them in a first round series.
Yeah, Joe Mazzulla is a
Um,
great coach as well. And speaking of great coaches, moving on to the Houston Rockets, and the former Celtic coach, Ime Udoka. Rockets were the team of the offseason, right? They made massive moves all offseason. A bit of a head scratcher for the Suns. We can talk about that later as we get to it, going after Jalen Green and Dylan Brooks. But to give it your all this season with Kevin Durant joining the team, getting Dorian Finney-Smith, getting Clint Capella, having that reunion, a Kobe, underrated signing, great defensive player to join Tari Eason as one of the more lethal defensive duos off of a bench in the NBA. Really just great moves. And an unfortunate loss in Cam Whitmore. I think he's somebody who had a ton of potential to really shape up the NBA, and I think he still absolutely has that ability. He's proven it in the limited time that he's had to be an impact player. But they've had such a crowded team, and I think they're certainly a team to watch to come out of the West. So
yeah,
I would give them A minus.
I think that's a very fair grade because, and the one big thing that happened to the Rockets was completely outside of their control with Fred VanVleet going out with that ACL injury. So I think outside of that, that was the big negative of their offseason, right? Like you said, Cam Whitmore losing him hurts, but I think they have enough wings to replace him with. I think, like you said, Josh Okogie and Dorian Finney-Smith is more than enough to have that replacement. And then, you still got Tari Eason and Jabari Smith Jr. I think the biggest weak link for this Rockets team is the point guard, because Van Fleet went down with an injury. And they actually just announced today that their starting lineup, at least for opening night, they're going to have Amen Thompson at the point guard. They're going to have so
which
much length.
which
It's
I don't hate.
Thompson, it's Thompson, Durant, Jabari Smith Jr., Shangoon, and Adams. That's the starting five. That's a
Yeah.
scary starting five. That team is going to get a ton of offensive rebounds. They lack a little bit of shooting, but they still have Kevin Durant, so they'll have some shooting. Yeah, and again, the Kevin Durant trade was great. The fact that all it took was Jalen Green, Dylan Brooks, and a first round pick, I think you make that trade 10 times out of 10.
Yep.
I'll give them an A. I think the Dorian Finney Smith signing is a little under the radar. So I liked a lot of the moves they made.
Absolutely.
Um, moving on to the New York Knicks. So the Knicks made a lot of, I would say, under the radar moves. They signed Jordan Clarkson to a 1 year vet minimum. They signed Gershon Yabusele to a 2 year 12 mil. They signed Malcolm Brogdon, who now has decided to retire, and they extended Mikal Bridges to a 4 year, $150 million contract. I
Mhm.
think going into the offseason, there were virtually no expectations for the Knicks to make any kind of move, very limited in terms of salary cap. And I honestly think that they got two of the best players they could have gotten with the cap space that they had.
Yeah.
Where do you stand on the Knicks?
Yeah, I mean, they didn't have a lot to work with. I think just getting Clarkson was unexpected for the Knicks, and I think they lacked depth in the offseason, and it showed. In part due to the high number of minutes that Coach Tibbs was having them play. As much as I love Tibbs, you saw how that wore out the guys at the end of the year. And there's only so much Deuce McBride can do on his own off the bench in terms of a scoring punch. So adding Clarkson to the bench is a big add. Same with Yabusele. I think also a major move was the extension in Mikal Bridges. You're seeing a selfless team here between Jalen Brunson taking a pay cut. I think Mikal could have gotten more as well elsewhere. So I think this is a team that, as biased as I am, they're certainly the team to watch in the East as a potential one seed coming out of the East. So really excited about the Knicks. As long as they stay healthy, I think that they're my early favorites to come out of the East and potentially face either the Rockets or the Thunder in the championship.
I agree. I think the Knicks' biggest problem last year was depth, right? Like that
Yep.
was their one weakness,
Mhm.
and they have solved that, seemingly solved that, as long as the players work well together and have good chemistry. Um, Having Clarkson, Yabusele, and it seems like Josh Hart will be another member off the bench. That's a solid three-man lineup. Not to mention guys like Landry Shamet, who proved himself in the playoffs last year, and Deuce McBride. So I think they've got a good bench this year, and I think, like you said, they're one of the best teams, if not the best team in the Eastern Conference.
Awesome.
So yeah, we'll move on to the Los Angeles Lakers. They made a few signings. DeAndre Ayton being the big one, signed him to a 2-year, $16 million contract. They signed Jake LaRavia, 2-year, $12 million, and Marcus Smart to a 2-year, $10.5 million contract. They lost Dorian Finney-Smith, Jordan Goodwin, and Shake Milton in the offseason. They also agreed on an extension for Luka Doncic. What are your
Yeah,
thoughts?
I think it's a B. I think it's a B, and we can keep it moving. I mean, the Lakers, they they did what they had to do. They filled the center position. Aiton, if he's a sliver of what he was, supposed to be coming into the NBA out of Arizona, um, you know, that's a plus for them. It's a net plus. They lost Finney Smith, which is, a tough loss. We mentioned it before, but Aiton makes up more for a positional need than they still have Rui Hachimura back there. They were
Jared
having trouble
Vanderbilt, too.
and Jared Vanderbilt coming back. I think they're fine at that 3-4 spot that Finney Smith was going to play anyway. Get Aiton, see what he can do. Cheap deal, 2 year, 16 million. And give LeBron one more chance once he comes back from injury to, you know, make a little run for himself. So yeah, it's a B.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the one thing is I'm interested in how Aiton will play with a guy like Luca. Such a good playmaker. He didn't really have that in Portland, and when he played with Chris Paul in Phoenix, that was when he was at his best. So I'm interested to see if he can take that step up again, or if he's gonna do more of the same. We'll have to see. But I agree. I'd give them about a B. They didn't have a ton of options going into this offseason, and they got Aiton. And Laravia, I think, was an underrated signing. I don't know how much Marcus Smart's going to give you. I kind of feel like he's past his prime, and with all the injuries, he's not the same. But I think it's a risk worth taking with that contract.
Yeah, for sure. And moving on to the Pacers, I think if you had to give a bad offseason grade to any team, the Pacers are my team at least. You can't lose Miles Turner in that offseason and get no return. I think Miles Turner was in trade talks probably for the last 6 seasons. And, he obviously had a tremendous run the past two playoffs. And he's somebody that, with Halliburton going down, was critical to have returned to the team, and for him to then jump ship to the Milwaukee Bucks of all teams is a brutal loss for the Pacers. Isaiah Jackson is somebody to look out for. He missed a lot of last season with injury, and he was an exciting prospect when healthy. So we'll see if he can kind of help fill that void. And same with Wiseman. Might as well take the flyer with him. He's come back from major injury, but former second overall pick. He was picked second for a reason. So you might be able to squeeze out some points and good effort plays out of him as well. So, but with the Miles Turner loss, I have to give this a D.
Yeah. I think the Pacers, they kind of thought that they had all the leverage because no teams have cap space. And I don't think they expected the Bucks to, buy out Damian Lillard in order to make this move. That doesn't change the fact that it was a terrible offseason for the Pacers. You lose Miles Turner. And then obviously Halburn goes down with injury. That's not on them. But like you said, I mean, their center depth kind of falls off a cliff. They didn't have Isaiah Jackson, and James Wiseman last year because they both went down with Achilles injuries. Now they're back, but an Achilles injury isn't the easiest thing to come back from. So I think that they're really going to struggle at that position. They made a trade to get Jay Huff. I think he was solid last year for the Grizzlies. Kind of a stretch five, good shot blocker. That is definitely valuable, but they lose so much in Turner and they don't get much back. I have to agree with you. I'd give them a D.
Yeah, and just to even make the play in, they're going to need huge contributions from Neesmith, from Nemhard. They're going to have to make major jumps, be in that 20 point per game type of category. And as well as Matherin. Matherin has shown the ability to score at a high level, but to put it all together for a consistent season is what they've lacked from him so far. So he needs to be more than a bench spark for them to make a run, even out of play in my opinion.
And I think the big thing for me is that Siakam needs to play like an All NBA second team kind of player. If he can do
Absolutely.
that, then the Pacers I think can still fall around that fifth seed range if everything goes right. But I think it largely depends on Siakam, and like you said, those role players in them are decent.
Absolutely. Moving on to the Denver Nuggets. They traded away Michael Porter Jr., a prolific scorer, a great shooter for them. But in my opinion, they upgraded in those exact same categories in Cam Johnson. He's somebody who off the dribble is going to make Jokic's life a lot easier. Same with Jamal Murray. He has the ability to score. I think Michael Porter Jr. at times would drive Nuggets fans crazy with the amount of kind of silly shots and contested threes he would take. And Cam Johnson, he's a smart player coming out of UNC. He played all 4 years there. And so I'm excited to see how he looks in this team. I think Tim Hardaway Jr. was an excellent addition as well. He is somebody who can come off the bench any given night and drop 30. And so having that spark off the bench, I saw that Christian Brown was just extended as well today. He's somebody who, in conjunction with Tim Hardaway Jr., that's a nice duo, a nice scoring punch. So I'm excited to see how they look. They got Jonas Valanciunas as well, underrated center. He plays his game at his speed. He'll get you 10 points. He'll get you 10 rebounds. If Jokic is out for a game or two, he's absolutely somebody you can trust to throw into the starting lineup and make an impact in that game. Great offseason for the Nuggets. I give them an A minus.
Yeah, I think the Nuggets did everything right. I think the Cam Johnson trade was great because not only do I think that Cam Johnson's a better player than Michael Porter Jr., but they also save so much cap space. They go under the apron, and then that allows them to make these other moves. Like you said, I think Valanciunas, that was an under the radar move. The Nuggets. One of the Nuggets' biggest weaknesses last season was that when Jokic went to the bench, the bench fell apart. They didn't really have a center. They had to play DeAndre Jordan. So that was their biggest flaw. And now they get a guy like Valanciunas, who is one of the best backup bigs in the league, in my opinion. And you bolster your bench a lot with Bruce Brown, with Tim Hardaway Jr. I think I think I'll give the Nuggets an A plus. Like I don't think they could have had a better offseason than they did. And I think that they're right back in the contender tier with the Thunder and the Rockets. The Nuggets, they pushed the Thunder to 7 games last season. And in my opinion, they got much better. So it wouldn't shock me if the Nuggets upset the Thunder next season. But
Yeah.
I guess we'll have to wait and see.
We'll see how the guys gel. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Moving on to the Bucks. We previously talked about the failures of the Pacers in this offseason, and the major move, of course, for the Bucks would be poaching Miles Turner from them on a 4-year, $107 million deal. Big money for the big man, but well deserved based on his performance, his ability to stretch the floor, make Giannis's life a bit easier. You couldn't ask for a better five to pair alongside Giannis from a perspective of play style. Right, Giannis is a bruiser. He's going to be in the paint, and being able to dish it out to Miles Turner for a pick and pop three is something that they haven't had. They had it in Brook Lopez, but Turner does it at a much higher clip. I think Brook Lopez's age was starting to show. As much as I love Brook Lopez and the legend he is, he's not the same athlete that he was at the beginning of his career. And so having that blocking potential, that above the rim potential of Miles Turner is a great addition for the Bucks. Unfortunately, they lost Damian Lillard, and that experiment clearly failed between him and Giannis. But it's a move that I guess they had to make coming off an Achilles tear. It's a tough injury at his age as well to come back from and play at the level that he expects to. We'll see what happens in his time with the Blazers to come. But with Cole Anthony, I think it's a solid move. Getting him uh, is a nice spark off the bench at the guard position. Excited to see him and Gary Trent kind of really light it up from three and be the aggressive offensive players that they are. A bit concerned about the Bucks defensively, but with Taurean Prince being re-signed, they have some guys between him, Giannis, and Miles Turner that can hold it down. So overall, with the loss of Dame and the addition of Miles Turner, it nets out to like a B minus in my head.
To me, I think the Bucks are the hardest team to grade because like there are two versions of how you can grade them, right? There's the version of did the Bucks do what's best for their future, or there's the version of did the Bucks do the best they can to keep Giannis on the team, right? So like I think what the Bucks did was everything to keep Giannis, right? And I like they did just enough to give Giannis just enough of I don't even say star power, but just enough to where the team feels like it could still compete a little bit. But I almost feel like at this stage the Bucks have no chance. They're kind
They're
of
in
falling out of
purgatory.
the. Say that again.
They're in a purgatory.
Yeah, exactly. And so like I completely understand why the Bucks are hanging on to Giannis for dear life. They want to sell tickets. That's the best way they can. But I think the best move for the future of the franchise is to just cut ties while Giannis's trade value is still at an all-time high. But regardless of all that, I think, the Miles Turner signing is fine. And the buyout for Lillard, it's a little weird. And I think that down the line, it's going to look a lot worse when they're stuck with all that they don't have the cap space that they'll need. So I'm gonna give them I'll give them a C, because I do think guys like Cole Anthony and Amir Coffey, those are underrated signings. I think Cole Anthony, given more minutes, like you said, he's a good scorer. So playing with a guy like Giannis could help them a lot because the Magic were one of the worst offensive teams in the league. They have been for like 10 plus years, I believe they've been a bottom 10 offense. So for Cole Anthony to play with guys like Giannis and Turner, it might allow him to score more and kind of unleash some of his potential that we didn't really see.
Yeah, absolutely. I think moving on to the Clippers, talking about teams that are aging, you know, weird offseason for the Clippers. It feels like one of those teams that if you looked at it 7 years ago, you'd think it's the greatest team ever constructed. And their addition of Bradley Beal, who at the time I think was averaging 30 points a game. You got Chris Paul, who's one of the best point guards of all time. You got Brooke Lopez. And it was kind of a head scratching offseason. I think these are good additions. They're good players. Really interested to see how they all gel together. That's going to be a sight to see. I think losing Norman Powell really hurts. He was a tremendous player last year and a great shooter as well. If Bradley Beal can somewhat return to his Wizards ways, you got yourself a great team out there in LA. But that said, the John Collins move for Norman Powell was just a weird one for me. Um, Collins has kind of fallen off a cliff of late, and so I hope for his sake he can return back to that form when he was out with the Hawks. And so we'll see how it looks going forward, but I would give him a C minus.
Wow. See, I think this is the first one where we differ quite a bit. I honestly like a lot of the moves the Clippers made. I mean, the biggest problem with this team is how old they are. I mean, they've got to be one of the oldest teams of all time. I think the something about like the average age of all their rotation players is like 34 years old or something
Yeah.
ridiculous. Um, but I this team has a lot of depth. I think so. I actually read recently that John Collins is going to be coming off the bench. I was expecting him to start, but it seems like they're going to be starting Derek Jones Jr. And
Interesting.
like you have Chris Paul off the bench, you have Bogdanovich, you have Chris Dunn, and then
Mhm.
like you said, Brooke Lopez. Like they just have a lot of guys that they can throw out there. If someone's having a bad night, you can go with someone else. Nick Batum too is another player who he had a solid season last year. Um, and like I think Bradley Beal has become pretty underrated just because he was just not good because of his contract. Like he was very much underperforming for his contract. But for a guy that's making like $8-10 million a year, he's a pretty good player that'll get you 15, 16 points per game.
Yeah.
And I think that the Norman Powell loss definitely hurts. I think he was one of the most underrated players in the league last year. I think he deserved to be an all-star. Um, but subtracting Norman Powell and adding both John Collins and Bradley Beal to me is a positive. And then I think Chris Paul is still, he still showed that he can be a positive player with the Spurs he was. Brooke Lopez, while like you said, is aging and is not quite what he was, he's still a net positive player in my opinion. So
Mhm.
with the amount of depth that they had, I think Zubac is one of the most underrated
Good
players in the
center.
league.
Yeah.
His defense, yeah, I think as long as Kawhi Leonard plays, the whole issue with the off the court stuff,
Yeah.
um, and if James Harden can keep up with how he played last year, I would give them an A minus.
Wow. We'll see how they look.
Yeah.
Going on
Well,
to the
moving on to
Pistons.
the you go.
Yeah. We got Karis LeVert signing with them. Some weird moves. I think they kind of just like netted out their team to what it was before between their additions of Duncan Robinson and Karis LeVert and losses of Schroeder and Tim Hardaway Jr. and potentially Malik Beasley. And so I think ultimately it's a net. I don't think they got any better. I don't think they got any worse. I think they're still building a young team there, getting the chemistry going. Remind me a lot of the Cavs from a few years ago, even the Thunder. I think they're trying to replicate a similar formula there in Detroit. So I would give them a B. Just a fine offseason, no major moves. They're gonna just keep it moving and keep with that young core, Jaden Ivey coming back.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think B is fair. Because the whole Malik Beasley thing, not exactly in their control, and he could still come back. So Duncan Robinson to me is like a worse version of Beasley. I think it's a fine signing, because in the sense of like he fills that role, and so you don't have to change a bunch of things to implement Duncan Robinson. And I think Levert kind of fills the Schroeder role, not exactly the same, but they can both handle the ball, good scorers. I do think losing Tim Hardaway Jr. is going to hurt. Simone Fontecchio is also an underrated loss. Um, but again, like it's mostly a neutral kind of with losses and gains. So I think a B is completely fair. Ivy coming back from injury. I think Asor Thompson is going to take on a bigger role this season. I think a B is completely fair.
Yeah. Awesome. Keep it moving into the Midwest. Back to Minnesota. Minnesota. Julius Randle, former Knick legend, re-signing with them. Naz Reid re-signing with them. They did what they had to do. Um, the big loss was Alexander Walker, right? I think that's just something that they couldn't keep. And so excited to see how Terrence Shannon Jr. steps up in his place. I think he's a really exciting prospect out of Illinois, and he showed his ability towards the end of last season. He's a prolific scorer, but a freak athlete as well. And so I think he's going to need to make a big step this season to kind of fill that void and that especially that defensive void that Walker Alexander offered the Wolves. And it also will challenge Anthony Edwards. He's got to prove that he's a top player in this league. I think right now he's outside the top 10 in most lists, at least in my list. And he needs to make that jump still in my brain. I think last postseason he showed that he has that ability to be that guy. But in the Western Conference Finals, right, he saw his limitations, and so we'll see how his offseason worked out for him. And overall, the loss of Alexander Walker, they did what they had to do. I'm going to stay in the B range for the Midwest Minnesota Timberwolves.
Yeah, I think that's a fair rating. I think the big thing for me, which I was going to point out exactly what you pointed out, is I want to see how Terrence Shannon Jr. fits in with the loss of Nickeil Alexander Walker. I think it's an underrated loss that people aren't talking about enough. Alexander Walker was very solid for them, And I think that they struggled depth wise to begin with. And with the loss of Alexander Walker, I think your only two like solid bench players are DiVincenzo and Naz Reid.
Yeah.
We'll have to see, can Rob Dillingham make a bigger jump this season? I think that, that would be huge for them. But they really don't have a ton of depth. And I think a lot of people have been talking about them as in this contender tier because they've made the conference finals the last two seasons. But it if Terrence Shannon Jr. can't replicate what Nickeil Alexander Walker did, I think that they, to me, are a second round exit next season. So I think losing Nickeil Alexander Walker hurts quite a bit. But they re-signed Nas Reed, they re-signed Julius Randle. Those were very important, obviously. So because of that, I'll say I'll give them a B minus.
Yeah.
They did what they could.
Yeah, and that's not to say that, the Nikhil Alexander Walker loss is big. Um, but, at least personally, I really believe in Terrence Shannon Jr. They're not the same player. They're going to lose a bit on the defensive side. But in terms of creating off the ball, he's a much better on-ball player than Alexander Walker ever was. And so it provides them with a little different element to that offense that I'm excited to see. I think DiVincenzo has proven that he's a good defensive player. And so he's going to need to take that leap again and really commit on the defensive end of the court. So excited to see what the Wolves do. And yeah, moving on to another team that made some big moves really early in the offseason, with the Orlando Magic going after Desmond Bane, getting rid of KCP, getting rid of Cole Anthony, and 5 first-round picks, which seems like a massive, massive package for Desmond Bane. Desmond Bane is a culture piece. It's an underrated part of his game. He's a bruiser. He will always be in a fight once every 10 games in some capacity. He's going to be facing the Warriors a little bit less, so that might become every 30 games. But, I think Desmond Bane he's a great player. He's going to be a nice complement to Paolo Banchero, who they just committed to in this offseason with the big extension. Tyus Jones had an off year last year, but I still think he's a prolific point guard off the bench, ideally. And Mo Wagner as well is a solid big who can stretch the floor, complements his brother well. And so overall, it feels like a move that definitely made them a better team. And they still have the youth. They still have the youth to make a move and at the deadline if they need to. So I think it was a B plus offseason for the Magic. 5 first-round picks is obviously not ideal, but when your players that you're giving up are Caldwell Pope and Cole Anthony, you kind of have to expect that.
I have a question. Who do you think's a better player, Desmond Bane or Mikal Bridges? Because they are very much the same package.
Yeah, I think that they're similar. That they're not the same player, right?
Yeah,
I think from a fit standpoint, I think Bridges fits the Knicks roster like a glove when he plays at his best. And so I think that warrants the return in that trade a bit more in my brain than say the Desmond Bane move. I think Bane is more of an on-ball player at times, and so I'm interested to see if that clashes a bit with Paolo, and Wagner. Those are both ball dominant players, right? And so Mikal Bridges has proven in his time with the Suns that he's somebody who can be a complementary player. And so in my brain, I think the Desmond Bane trade is slightly worse than that Bridges
that's
trade.
fair. Yeah, I think with the Magic, they were in such desperate need of shooting, and they definitely get that with Bane. Like I mentioned earlier, they've been a bottom 10 offense for so long. So I think they were pretty desperate to, get as good offensively as they can. Yeah, I think short term, this team is definitely much better. But long term, with those 5 first round picks, it's a very risky move. But I kind of like it. I like the all in attempt. The Magic, they have two great young stars in Boncaro and Wagner. And they still, even though they traded all those picks, they still have assets they can trade. I think, Jalen Suggs missed most of the season last year, and that was a big loss for them. His defense is enormous for them. And when he's on the floor, the Magic are so much better than when he's off. I think the addition of Bane is going to help a lot. I think Kentavious Caldwell Pope had a very disappointing season last year. So I think Bane is just such a huge upgrade over him. And like
Yeah.
you said, they can still make a midseason trade. I think something like if they could get Kobe White to just bring more offense to that team. I think he could fit in perfectly there. a trade like that, they're in the mix as the top
Yeah,
team in the East. I think they're very solidly the third best team in the Eastern Conference.
absolutely.
So yeah, with a weaker East, I mean, I don't hate the all-in attempt.
Yeah,
But like we've been talking about, 5 first-round picks is a little too much. I'll give them a B.
yeah.
I still think they got better today, which
I
matters.
I think one move I have to shout out is Jace Richardson, their draft pick, son of Jason Richardson, out of the Big Ten, Michigan State. He's somebody who's young. He was a one and done at Michigan State. He can score the ball. He's a lefty. He brings a different dynamic to that backcourt in terms of replacing Cole Anthony. So he's somebody to look out for as somebody who could get minutes by the end of the year, a nice depth piece. So an underrated draft pick that I liked at the value at 25.
Yeah. All right, the last team in today's episode, the Golden State Warriors. So they had a weird offseason because they took so long to get things rolling because of the Jonathan Kuminga drama. And that was finally solved pretty recently. They gave Kuminga that 1+1 team option deal. They give him 25 million for this season. They're almost definitely going to trade him before the end of the year. It'll be interesting what kind of value they recuperate because it doesn't seem like the Warriors want him, and we'll see how many minutes he actually plays. But outside the Kuminga stuff, they do make some good signings. They sign Al Horford, they sign DeAnthony Melton, and they sign Seth Curry. They did just release Seth Curry, but it's a cap space thing. They're planning on bringing him back in like November. Um, but I mean, yeah, those are decent signings. For like Al Horford, I think definitely does help their team. They need a little bit more big men. I think losing Kevon Looney hurts a little bit, but they still have Trace Jackson Davis. Um, and like the Clippers, this team is very old. I
Yeah.
think the question is, can the team rely on just staying healthy with these 35 plus year old players? Steph Curry got injured in the playoffs last year. Butler's been hurt more, has been missing games more. Um, in terms of what they actually did in the offseason, I'll give them a C plus because the Kuminga stuff just took too long. And I think if they had figured that out sooner, they could have made some other moves as well.
Yeah, I think I would agree with the C plus grade. I think the Warriors have been in this situation where they're trying to make a big move. They tried to make the trade for Kevin Durant. They've been in every trade talk for a star. Um, and I think they're really trying to get those last years of Steph Curry, and maybe bring back another championship. With that said, they look tremendous to end the year. They were the hottest team in basketball, and going to the playoffs, nobody in the Western Conference wanted to face them. I think they would have given the Thunder a run for their money if they stayed healthy. And so they're running it back. They're adding Al Horford. I think they're like a year younger than the Clippers in my brain. And so I think they're certainly a contender this year. Steph Curry is Steph Curry. He's ageless. The way his play style caters to that very well. The fit with Jimmy Butler, it looked tremendous last year. Let's just see if it was just a hot streak or if that's something that they can sustain for 82 games. I think they're going to need Draymond Green to stretch the floor and start being a reliable shooter from three and maybe 2 to 3 attempts a game, knocking down above like 35, 34%. That's what they need from him to make that extra leap. And they tried to make up for some of that lack of shooting outside of Steph and the Al Horford signing. So really excited to see how he pairs with that team. Um, and obviously, Gary Payton is an integral part to Steve Kerr's rotation and a good friend of Steph Curry and somebody that I'd like to also see make a step offensively and be a reliable shooter from the corner because too many times he's um, bricked it off of the side of the backboard off of a Steph Curry dish. So let's see Gary Payton make that leap because he's a great player.
Yeah, I think to me it comes down to Pajemski and Moody maybe taking that next jump as well. So we'll have to see. But
Absolutely.
thank you guys for tuning into today's episode. Next week, we will be going over the rest of the teams and grading their off seasons. So we will see you then.
Toodles.
Take care.